The officer's hand was on his holster before he even finished the sentence. "Don't you dare move, boy." My partner Darius went completely still beside me. That particular stillness I'd come to recognize over 3 years working together. The kind that isn't fear, but something older and more disciplined than fear. Something practiced since boyhood in the way only certain men in this country learn to practice it. What Officer Curtis Briggs didn't know, standing there on Maple Avenue at 7:15 on a Tuesday evening, was that the 2 black men he'd just cornered outside Henderson's corner store were carrying federal credentials that outranked every badge in his precinct combined. He didn't know that within 72 hours he would be the one in handcuffs, escorted out of the building he'd called home for 11 years, in front of every colleague whose respect he thought he'd earned. He didn't know any of that yet, but the next 72 hours were already set in motion the moment he opened his mouth. I'd been with the FBI's Organized Crime Division for 9 years by then. My partner Darius Webb had 7. We'd been paired 3 years before. 2 black agents in a division not known for its demographic range, which made us extraordinarily effective at a specific kind of fieldwork. We didn't look like what people expected federal agents to look like. We'd used that expectation gap to close cases no one else could get near. On most days, it felt like an advantage. Standing outside Henderson's that October evening with our earpieces out and our jackets plain, waiting on a surveillance target named Eddie Voss. That same gap was about to become something else entirely. I thought about that later. The cruel irony of it. The same thing that made us exceptional at our jobs was the same thing that put us in Briggs's crosshairs. The operation had nothing dramatic about it on the surface. 6 months into a money laundering investigation spanning 3 states, Voss collected cash deliveries from a courier at the bodega 4 blocks from his apartment. Just 2 men on a sidewalk watching a door. The way we'd done it 100 times in 100 neighborhoods. We were good at being invisible. The problem was that Officer Curtis Briggs didn't see invisible men when he looked at us. He saw something that apparently required his immediate attention. I noticed the cruiser slow down the first time and let it pass. A black and white drifting by a convenience store at 7 in the evening was unremarkable. Darius noticed it differently. Without looking up from his phone, he said quietly, "He's doing a loop." I glanced down the block. The cruiser sat half a block east, engine running, watching. I felt the first faint shift. Not quite unease, more like a change in atmospheric pressure your body registers before your mind has language for it. "We're not doing anything," I said, mostly to myself. That was the entire point. We were 2 men on a public sidewalk. The fact that it needed to be stated said everything about the math of the moment. The cruiser returned in under 3 minutes. Briggs stepped out before it fully stopped. Early 40s, broad through the shoulders, with the walk of a man who had never once been wrong in his own estimation. He looked us over with the expression of someone performing a calculation they'd already decided the answer to, thumbs in his belt, gaze moving from Darius to me to the store window and back. "Evening," he said. Not a greeting. An opening move. "Evening, officer," I replied, keeping my voice level and easy. "You boys waiting on something?" He let the word sit in the October air. Boys. Casual and deliberate at once. The way a weapon left visible on a table is still casual. Darius's jaw tightened by a fraction. I felt something resonate in my own chest. A vibration I knew well and hated knowing. "Just standing here," Darius said. His voice was careful, controlled. The voice of a man who learned long ago exactly when to spend words and when to hold them. Briggs nodded slowly. "Got some activity in this area lately. Loitering complaints. Residents calling it in." He glanced at the store. "Theater more than investigation. You live around here?" "Not far," I said. "ID," he said. Not a question. I reached into my jacket slowly. Briggs's right hand moved toward his holster. I stopped completely. I'm reaching for my identification, I said, and the steadiness in my own voice almost surprised me. I want to be very clear about what I'm doing before I do it. Something crossed Briggs's face. Not shame, something shorter and hotter. Irritation. Like being required to wait was the real offense happening here. I pulled out my credentials. Not a driver's license. The gold shield and the laminated card with the Department of Justice seal. My photograph. My name. Special Agent Marcus Cole, Federal Bureau of Investigation. I held it steady and watched his eyes move across it. He read it once, then again, slower. Beside me, Darius had already produced his own without being asked, holding it with the quiet patience of a man who has sat in this particular waiting room before. Briggs looked at Darius's credentials, then at mine. The silence between the three of us had texture, the specific weight that arrives when a situation snaps into a different shape and everyone present knows it and nobody has acknowledged it yet. A car passed on the street. The store's refrigeration unit hummed behind the glass. I didn't smile. I didn't move. "You're—" he started. "Federal agents," I said, "on assignment." What happened next told me everything about Curtis Briggs. Not the initial stop, which a generous person might explain several ways, but what he did in the 30 seconds after learning who we were. His face didn't soften. It set harder, like concrete finding its shape, as if being wrong was a personal injury and we were responsible for inflicting it. "I'm going to need you both to step away from this location," he said, quieter now, and somehow worse for it. "This is an active patrol corridor. Move along." The cold in my chest became something that no longer moved. "Officer," I said, my tone measured to the point of having edges, "we are federal agents conducting a lawful surveillance operation. We have every legal right to be at this location. We are not moving." He took one step closer. "I don't care what badge you're carrying," almost under his breath, but not quite quiet enough. "You're going to move, or I'm going to make you move." Darius and I looked at each other for just a second. Not surprise, something more like a shared, terrible recognition. We had identified ourselves clearly, presented valid federal credentials, stated our lawful purpose, and none of it had mattered. Not one piece of it. Behind Briggs, a second cruiser rolled to the curb. His backup. The second officer, younger, with the expressionless efficiency of someone who had learned to follow rather than think, stepped out and took up a position to our left. Briggs glanced back at him, then returned his attention to us, and in that moment I understood with absolute clarity that this was no longer a misunderstanding. A misunderstanding ends when you present federal credentials. This was a choice. Curtis Briggs had looked at two black men, looked at their federal badges, and decided the badges didn't count. And he was about to find out exactly what that decision cost. Briggs moved first. He stepped directly in front of me, close enough that I could smell the coffee on his breath, and put one hand on my arm. Not grabbing, not yet. But the pressure was a statement, a declaration that his authority existed independent of reality, independent of the credentials still in my hand, independent of everything except his own certainty that he was the one who decided what happened on this sidewalk. "You're going to want to take your hand off me," I said, quiet, icy, the kind of quiet that isn't restraint, it's aim. He didn't take his hand off me. Darius spoke then, and his voice had shifted into something I'd only heard twice before, both times in interrogation rooms. "Officer, you are currently making physical contact with a federal agent in the performance of his lawful duties. I'm advising you for the final time to step back." He paused, and the pause was deliberate. This conversation is being recorded. That last sentence landed differently than the others. Briggs's grip loosened by a degree. His eyes moved to Darius's collar, then to mine, searching for the device. He wouldn't find it. We'd gone small that evening. a button mic threaded through the jacket lining, near invisible. But the possibility was enough to introduce the first crack of hesitation into his face. Just a crack. Not enough to stop him. "You're obstructing a patrol," Briggs said, with the mechanical flatness of a man reciting a script he'd committed to before arriving. "I'm detaining both of you. Hands where I can see them." The young backup officer shifted his weight behind us, the small, particular shuffle of a man who has just been asked to participate in something he isn't sure about, but lacks the character to refuse. I did not resist. I did not raise my voice. I took my phone from my jacket pocket, slowly and visibly, and dialed the direct line of Special Agent in Charge Patricia Holt, my supervisor, 22 years in the Bureau, currently 12 minutes away. "Briggs," I said, while the line rang, "I want you to hear this call." She picked up on the second ring. "Call. Status? I am currently being physically detained by Officer Curtis Briggs, badge 447, Eastward PD, outside Henderson's corner store on Maple Avenue. My credentials have been presented and disregarded. I am requesting immediate contact with the Eastward Watch Commander." 1 second of silence. Then Patricia Holt's voice took on the particular quality of a calm that is not calm at all, but something far more purposeful. "Stay on the line," she said. "Do not move." Briggs had gone very still. The hand on my arm was gone. He stared at my phone the way a man stares at something that has just changed every term of the situation in a way he cannot take back. I watched the understanding travel across his face. Not the full understanding yet, but the beginning of it. The first cold acknowledgement that the ground had shifted beneath him, and he was not the one who'd caused it to shift. "Who is that?" he said, and for the first time his voice held a question instead of a command. "My supervisor," I said. The next 14 minutes were the longest of Briggs's career, though he didn't know it yet. The young backup officer had quietly retreated to stand beside his cruiser, arms at his sides, already performing the calculation of how to separate himself from the man he'd come to support. Smart instinct. Too late. The watch commander's call came through to Briggs's radio at minute 9. I heard only his side. "Sir." A pause. "Sir." Then silence. He lowered the radio and stood there under Henderson's buzzing sign, and for the first time he looked exactly like what he was. A man on a ledge he'd walked onto himself, in front of an audience he hadn't accounted for. Patricia arrived 11 minutes later in an unmarked sedan with the Bureau's legal liaison, Diane Chen, who carried a leather portfolio and spoke in the unhurried tones of someone who had spent 15 years converting situations like this into federal cases. She assessed the scene, then turned to the young backup officer. "Your body cam footage will be subpoenaed by morning," she said pleasantly. "I'd encourage you to think carefully tonight about what it shows." He was gone within 2 minutes. Before she turned her full attention to Briggs, Diane did one more thing. She looked at him directly and said, in that same pleasant register, "For what it's worth, officer, the agents you detained tonight are responsible for a federal money laundering investigation your department has been trying to gain access to for 2 years. They were 40 minutes from a significant arrest. Because of tonight, we're moving the surveillance window. The arrest will proceed without Eastward involvement." She let that sit for exactly 3 seconds. "Have a good evening." Then she walked back toward Patricia and me, already dialing her next call before she reached us. What followed was a conversation between Diane, Patricia, and the watch commander, arrived in person, visibly perspiring despite the October cold, that I wasn't present for, but was briefed on afterward. Diane laid out the federal statutes violated, item by item. When the watch commander asked whether this could be handled informally, she placed a single document on the hood of the cruiser and said nothing further. Briggs said he'd been doing his job, said he couldn't be expected to know. Diane asked him, "Know what exactly?" He didn't answer. Patricia was smiling a specific way when she told me that. I didn't sleep that night, not from distress but from the electrical charge that runs through you when something has shifted permanently. I sat at my kitchen table with cold coffee and went through it the way I go through any case. The moment Briggs looked at my federal badge and chose, deliberately, for it not to matter. I thought about every man who'd stood on that sidewalk without a badge, without a sedan arriving 12 minutes later, without what we had. How many complaints quietly filed and quietly absorbed. The city was beginning to lighten when I finally poured the coffee out. The formal complaint was filed that morning. Internal Affairs opened the same day. What they found over 3 weeks was not only Maple Avenue, documented by Darius's button recording, the watch commander's notes, and video taken by Henderson's owner from behind his window, who had filmed everything from the moment Briggs stepped out of his cruiser. But a pattern. 7 prior complaints against Briggs over 6 years. 7 stops with no probable cause, each quietly filed. The 8th had federal credentials, a live recording, and Diane Chen. Briggs was suspended within 72 hours. The review board recommended termination. The department, facing a federal civil rights inquiry, accepted. On a Thursday morning in November, Curtis Briggs walked out of the precinct for the last time. The Voss case closed 8 days after that, 6 months after Maple Avenue. An unfamiliar number called while I sat in a coffee shop near the field office. The watch commander transferred voluntarily to a different district. He'd been one of the officers who reviewed the 7 prior complaints, he told me. Plainly, without softening it. He'd testified before the review board. He said he should have done something about those complaints when they came across his desk. He didn't ask for forgiveness. He just said it, and let the silence after it mean what it meant. I thanked him. We hung up. Outside the window, an ordinary Tuesday morning moved in its ordinary way. I picked up my coffee, still warm, and for one simple, unheroic moment that shouldn't have meant anything, it meant everything.